Hello, American Legion family.
Hello.
It's an honor to be here with you today. Today at our Sweetheart Rally, it's a day to celebrate love. And I would also argue that it's a day to celebrate legacy, because that is what we have created as the American Legion family. I'm going to take this chance to tell you about my family legacy and what drew me to getting involved in the Legion. At this time, I would give a content warning. Some of the stories of my family's military history reference mental health conditions, PTSD, and death by suicide. When I was a little girl, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' place in Ashley, North Dakota. Some of you know where that is. At that time, it was a big town of around 2,500 people. Now it's more like 750. It had a big blue water tower with the town's name on it in block text. And at noon, 6 p.m., and maybe 9 p.m., there were town sirens to signify lunchtime, dinner time, and bedtime, or if you'd rather, curfew. My grandparents had a large red house on a prominent street that led to the town park and the hospital. All these years later, if you mention the big red house, it's still standing, and people still know what you're talking about. My grandma was a nurse at that hospital in the day that nurses wore nylon stockings, a white skirted uniform, and those pointed hats bobby pinned onto their fabulously coiffed hairdos. And my granddad was a social worker out of the county courthouse and government building. My grandparents, my mom, my aunt, and uncle were a typical World War II family. But to me, they were heroes because they made sacrifices that few today would understand. Because I don't have to explain to this group how years after you've served, the veteran and the family may still face challenges from that service. My granddad served in the Army in Okinawa in World War II, and I found out recently that he mobilized out of Fort Lewis McChord, which is where I spent some time in active service in 2003 as well, and I can only expect that things didn't change much where I was in the World War II style barracks. Grandpa didn't talk much. We would try to get him to talk about the war, but got precious little out of him. My mom says that he did talk once or twice about how it bothered him that they had to evacuate caverns of Japanese urns so that they could use them as tactical positions. He wrote my grandma during the war in a beautiful cursive handwriting. My understanding of their story was that my great-aunt Eleanor, my granddad's sister, convinced my grandma Ruth to write Grandpa while he was deployed to keep him company and to encourage him while he was overseas, and it seemed like it really worked. They didn't know each other at all, but that's how their relationship blossomed, so that by the time he got home, things were more serious. We got to see some of those letters right before Grandma died in 2010, and we decided to bury those letters with her. Grandma was extremely devoted to Grandpa. She had likely the more physically demanding job than Grandpa, but she'd come home from work, Hilux everything she'd worn or touched at the hospital, and iron his tank tops, his underwear, trousers, dress shirts, everything. She was a great cook, and as my mother's side of the family is full Germans from Russia, there were always dishes like sausages, kraut, pickled beets, pickled watermelon, dumplings, nifla soup, and potato salad. As a child, I loved staying with them, without the rest of my family, because I was, of course, the favorite grandchild, and I got to pick anything I wanted from the grocery store. I got Grandma and Grandpa to myself. I would visit the senior center with them, where my granddad could shoot decent pool. He took me to swimming lessons at the town's outdoor pool, which wasn't heated, and afterward, when I was cold, he'd blast the heat in his maroon late 70s Chevy Malibu in the middle of summer and buy me some deep-fried cheese balls from the drive-in, although you know that big guys like him run hot and he was likely miserable. I thought that my granddad was a tough guy. He threatened the neighborhood peeping Tom once with his decommissioned service rifle and told him to get off his property. Didn't matter if the thing could no longer shoot a bullet. I'm sure my granddad was intimidating, though. But he also didn't do anything halfway. He boarded up all the windows on that side of the house and sided over them so that you'd never know there had been windows there in the first place. And in hindsight, that wasn't his only run-in with neighbors. He didn't like his other neighbor on the other side of the house and must have referred to him in a less than complimentary light in the past, and he was, in my view, a rather mean-looking man. They'd had some disputes about whatever was along the adjacent or adjacent to the property line in the past, whoever's property it was. So one time when I was out with Grandpa watering the garden, this other neighbor was also watering his garden. I said loudly, "Look, Grandpa, the devil is watering." He didn't correct me, he just threw back his head and laughed. After all these years and working full-time with veterans as an assistant county veteran service officer, I know that problems with neighbors and hypervigilance of other people's actions can be a sign of PTSD, but I had no idea back then. It can also lead to significant legal issues, and I thank God that Grandpa never had to deal with any of those. I was most proud of my granddad when he put on his pointy Legion hat and sat high up on the float in the town parade with the other World War II vets. He had a few buddies around that he did talk with once in a while about his war experiences, and they were on that float. As far as I can remember, there weren't any other veteran service organizations in town, just the American Legion, which is still alive and well in Ashley, North Dakota. They serve lunch each Sunday after church, bringing the community into their building, in a town where there really is only one restaurant that has limited hours because it's hard to keep a business going in a town of 750. I remember attending Memorial Day observances with Grandpa where there were gun salutes, so I learned respect and patriotism from a young age. The post has a monument in front of their building of all their military personnel, and my granddad's name is forever enshrined on it. I believe I also have a second cousin who served post 9/11 listed on that monument also. My mom has a lot to say about military service as the daughter, sister, cousin, and mother of veterans. And when I listen to her talk about it, I hear the unrecognized trauma. She's innocent to it in a way because they didn't have mental health definitions back then. And I'm proud to say that this year she joined the Osseo Maple Grove American Legion Auxiliary. Although she could join in Ashley, she wanted to join our post because she liked what I was doing there. She's come up a few times, driving 5.5 hours to volunteer with me in our auxiliary steak fries, and it's been heartwarming to see her chatted up with some of the men and women near her age group. You see, my dad died in 2014 unexpectedly of pneumonia, rather suddenly without any prior health concerns. So it's been a lonely 10 years for her. My mom talks about having visited the Army recruiter with her brother Ron, my favorite uncle. But the recruiter told her, "You're a woman and you can't join, but mark my words, a few years down the road we'll have women in the military." My uncle Ron joined the South Dakota Army National Guard during Vietnam, and that time they truly did keep much of their guard stateside. He did have a deployment to the Panama Canal. Other than that, I don't know too much about his military history, but when you put my granddad's, my uncle's, and my basic training photos side by side, you can definitely see the family resemblance. My mom talks about her 3 cousins, the kids of her Aunt Esther and Uncle Emil, who deployed to Vietnam: Greg, Orson, and Perry. They all served at the same time. Her cousin Greg died by suicide. He would be 76 today, but he died at age 30 in 1977. He was drafted as a paratrooper and served in the Army in Vietnam for 2 years. My mom says that he was a gorgeous person and could have landed any Hollywood role with black, thick, curly hair like Elvis. He played football in high school, was a Golden Gloves boxer, and very athletic. He came back addicted to drugs and alcohol and was a shell of himself. Shortly after coming back from the war, he called his mom and said goodbye over the phone and shot himself while he was talking. The family rushed over, but he had shot himself in the head and was breathing his last breaths. Her cousin Orson was in an Army logistics role. He had 1 baby before he shipped out. He developed health issues from regular, consistent Agent Orange exposure from serving in Vietnam for 2 to 3 years. When he came back, he and his wife had 3 or 4 more kids, but he really struggled with alcohol, and that relationship ended in divorce. He had lung and stomach cancer and was in his 50s when he died. Perry was in Vietnam, and he was in the Navy. He is my mom's age and is the only one of the 3 who's still alive. He had many struggles with relationships over the course of his life, and he ended up being a caregiver for his mother when she neared the end of her life and his youngest brother when he came into poor health. He's a good man, and I remember bullshitting with him at Grandpa's funeral in 1996 about military service and motorcycles. My dad was in ROTC during college at NDSU. His draft number did come up, but he was informed that he had a rapid pulse and couldn't deploy. So when I joined the military, he wrote me beautiful letters at basic training, and when I was in active service about how proud he was that I devoted my life to God and country. And I still have those letters, and one of them I have taped to my mirror. He would also get up with me at 4 a.m. during drill weekends to shine my boots with me. I was one of the last generations to wear the black boots that you had to shine. They issued ACUs just as I was getting out in 2006. I joined the North Dakota Army National Guard at age 17 in the year 2000. My best friend Chantel had signed up through the recruiter and said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Sure, it sounds like an adventure," and started the enlistment process. Of course, because of my age, the recruiter had to come out to the house and get my parents' signature. They weren't super thrilled to have to do that, but they were also very proud. And my friend Chantel, by the way, she's still in. They had a basic training ship date the summer after our senior year of high school, but at the last minute, she told the Army she wasn't showing up for basic training and that the Air Force had snatched her up to become a C-130 mechanic. She's now an E9, or Chief Master Sergeant, for those of us who don't really know or care too much about the Air Force rank system. I'm, of course, very proud of her. But for me, it was always the Army. I mentioned all the family members who had served, and they were all except for one in the Army. I was third-generation Army, and nobody else in my generation had served. I was a 92 whiskey or a water treatment specialist, so it was a combination of knowing some mechanics, chemistry, and a bit of truck driving. The unique part of my service, I guess, was the timing of it. I shipped to basic training 2 weeks after the Twin Towers fell, and I realize now to this day how much of an impact that had on my mom. More trauma to add on to what she'd already experienced with other family. That and the time that I was on active service in 2003 preparing for orders for Iraq, although the government ultimately canceled our unit's mission and sent us home. These things had a lasting effect where you can still see the pain in her face and her voice when she talks about that time. So recently I felt compelled to apologize to her for how my military service impacted her, to acknowledge her sacrifices. Sometimes I think it's easier for us to go than it is for them to stay home. Other than that, I had a relatively routine military career. I served 6 years and reached the rank of E5 Sergeant, leading my own squad with our own 3,000 gallons per hour reverse osmosis water purification unit, a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment they'd entrust to a soldier in their early 20s. For several years after I served, I didn't think much about my service or what obligation I had to my brothers and sisters in arms until the work started calling me in. In 2020, it was a pandemic, and while everything was shut down, around the time of Veterans Day, I was looking for an observance. The Osseo Post had a modest outdoor gathering at the town Veterans Monument, and I met then Commander Walter Cole there, and he invited me down to the post. I came to post meetings, and they let me sit in on executive board meetings, even though I wasn't a member, so that I could learn about how the post was run. I have to say that I was immediately hooked by the tradition, the personalities, the uniforms, the branch humor, everything, because it brought me back to an earlier time in my life connecting with my family's service and also with my own. At the beginning of the following year in 2021, I got a job with a county commissioner, my friend who had just won his race and wanted me to lead his policy platforms. He basically let me do what I wanted with his veterans platform because his dad was a Vietnam vet and he wanted to get good things done for the veterans community. And within those years, the county was able to make a public proclamation as a Beyond the Yellow Ribbon County, had appropriated $750,000 in funding to design and build a veterans monument on Government Plaza, which we hope will break ground this fall. They'd conveyed 4 tax-forfeited properties to the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans to build veteran supportive housing, most of which around 40 units are online at this time. And they'd also invested in case management for homeless veterans. And I believe that Hennepin County has just declared functional zero, which doesn't mean there aren't any homeless veterans in Hennepin County, but we hope that now the instances of homelessness will be rare, brief, and non-recurring. So I'm proud to be in that work now. So over the past year, I had the chance to move into the Veterans Services Office and am carrying out a lot of that work directly to help homeless vets and justice-involved vets in the 4th District Veterans Treatment Court. I could not have been so successful in this work as quickly as an Assistant County Veterans Service Officer without everything the Legion has taught me over the past 3+ years and the relationships and the supports and helps that your posts have given me, and also the work partnering with the MVAF Fund, Fund 85. It really helps our veterans. So finally, I just want to say I don't trust people easily, but I have found many close friends in this organization that I do trust completely, and I'm grateful for the ability to be myself around you. I'm also grateful for a purpose and a platform in the legislative work you've entrusted my committee and I to lead. And I also want to express gratitude to the entire family, the Legion, the Auxiliary, the Sons, and the Riders. I'm super grateful how the Auxiliary at my post has welcomed my mom with open arms. You all represent the best that America has to offer. Thank you.